just super excited to have you all on stage, and I think there's so much that we can really explore at the intersection of art and AI in particular. But I have to say one thing for Linara, is it Dada Gan? Actually has a Twitter account, and it called you their envoy.
Yes, I'm here on behalf of Dadagan. If you want to follow Dadagan on Twitter, is the real Dadagan. Don't ask me about the fake ones.
But it's the first time I've seen an AI call a human their envoy, and maybe that's a glimpse to the future. But and let's just dive right into it. And I just wanted to ask, first of all, I mean, art is such a subjective thing, and to each of the panelists, really, what is art to you? How do you view art? Maybe we can start with River.
I guess that's a super subjective question.
Yep.
Maybe we can take it in the context of what art is right now.
Sure.
And I think one of the biggest questions over the next 20 years will be, is it human-made or is it machine-made? And how do we draw the distinction between the two of those to say, okay, is something that's made with AI art, right? Or does it need a human touch? And I think from a personal perspective, AI is based on humans, and so it is in fact making art, and we are contributing to its creation of art. And so whatever it is that is being created, if we're looking from a perspective of, let's say, Duchamp, right? Whatever the artist says is art is art, and I think that's probably where my perspective is on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about
Yeah, I think I follow you, and I think art is a wonderful social construction. Actually, is made through time, through history, through critics, through our own guts, and yeah, I think it's an outcome through it's a social outcome actually, and a personal one as well, and a machine one. No.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't have anything much different to say. I think there's a question of, let's say, intent and expression in art. So, like you said, if someone creates art and thinks that's art, that's art. And I would go further into the reception of art. So if someone experiences something and believes that art, that is also art, even if the intent was not to create art.
Interesting. That's very meta. Yeah, I tend to see it a lot as we sometimes confuse art with output. And in my mind, it's like, when you combine art and craft to get an output, the art is the expression that comes from within. It's the desire to tell a story, either through words or a picture or something like that. But then that gets combined with the craft. Your excellence or your style painting or your style writing or those kind of things. And then there's an output that comes from that. And then art lives in the eye of the beholder of that output, like you mentioned as well. So I personally believe, where the AI enters the art is much more valuable on the craft side of the fence, and it shouldn't really, and as I was sharing earlier on with my experience writing, is that if I use it to help me with the craft, it makes me a far more efficient producer of output as an artist. And I'm just curious, for each of you, how has generative AI impacted your art and the types of things that you do? Should we start again with River?
That's fine. So I'm the managing director of a technology and art collective. It's Intent. So we exist on the forefront of technology and art, and what are the new things that are coming in. And so as AI has become, let's say, more valuable over the past year, it went from a point in time when we were just playing with GAN, right? And it was like, okay, well, this is trash, but it's fun. And then it evolved very rapidly, to the point where Midjourney dropped their first version publicly, and all of a sudden now I'm making Salvador Dali chicken nuggets, right? And it's like, okay, it's a little bit more fun, but it's still, But then, fast forward to now, it's like, wow, we have, Dada Gan, we have Botto by Mario Klingman. We have such incredible artists working in the space who are using this technology in very interesting ways. And so for us, we've been trying to look at how do we combine human-made and AI-made to continue to create something very unique, right? And so something recently that has come out is the diffusion splatting, which is a new thing that's supposed to replace, photogrammetry and LiDAR. And so what we were able to do was take a project that we had created using sculptures of impossible human forms, and then bring them in and create 3D objects out of them. And then we can bring those into the real world, 3D print them, or use any number of techniques to kind of create an actual physical piece out of that. And so now we have AI sculptures. And the applications expand beyond that infinitely, right? Of combining the human creation with the machine creation. I think that we have a lot of exploration to do.
Okay, how about Alexandra?
I think it's like evolving. I reckon the first time I used OpenAI, we needed tokens actually to use it. Like GPT wasn't there, and so we started to write as a collective of artists a manifesto, and then we incorporated OpenAI into the creation of this manifesto. I think it was like 2020, 2021, right? So I think like my first like direct contact as a creator with AI was through writing, actually, and I was really like, we were all amazed, right? First time using all the tokens to create this piece of text. And yeah, I remember this time. I also remember like one of the first time I saw at Ars Electronica, the big digital art festival, an artwork called Doing Nothing with AI. I think it was like 2018, something like that. It was like it's still a beautiful sculpture anyway. I think it was asking like, what about AI, right? What can we do? So yeah, writing, and then like, as you mentioned, I think now it's like really, really like taking over all our tooling, right? So as a creative director, I also work like on creating brand design sometimes, right? Not only my personal creation or collective art project. And so I also use actually like, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, all sort of tools that are helping me actually to do my research. And then I pass it into like my other program, right, of creation. So maybe the Adobe Suite or maybe Blender. And Blender is now incorporating some AI tooling also. So the 3D is becoming very important in AI, and also like I really love using VR to actually draw. So Gravity Sketch is an amazing tool for me. I can like sketch everything in movement, and then exported it into Blender, for instance, and then having like AI actually helping me with this. So it's cross like border actually right now. Yeah, it's amazing.
It is pretty incredible, and I think it's
and then the vision for the future.
How about Lanara?
Well, I actually now disagree. I don't think GAN is trash. And this is not, I'm not speaking as that again envoy right now. I'm just speaking at myself. And I actually think that the art is not in the craft.
Okay.
Craft, of course, is integral part of the art. But if you're doing just crafts, I think most likely you're not doing art. And of course, the craft can be so vast, and it can include so many different techniques from like history, until these days. It's like, so I think you can do amazing things. And even right now, if you look at this kind of like a vintage GAN art, they're seen as something really important and valuable because they represent, that kind of evolution. And of course, that again is now using other tools as well. It's not like stuck. Like the name is stuck because that's what it was using in 2019, but it's using all these other tools now too. Yeah.
For those in the audience who aren't familiar with the term GAN, it's a generative adversarial network, which was one of the early precursors for actually generating images. And in my career, I found that when I spell it out to people, I actually scare them when they see the word adversarial. So, but I agree with your point that craft is an important part of it, but the craft itself isn't the art. But I think, like from what Alexandra was mentioning is like part of it as well. It's like, a good artist with the right tools can express themselves more quickly and at scale. And, and it's the at scale part I'd really be curious to hear your experience, because you're all established artists. You're a well-known name in your industry. When you create something, people pay attention. But given that we're entering this new world now where these new tools are available for other artists to be able to craft their art to produce some kind of output, what advice would you give them to become established artists? Maybe we'll start with this.
Right, okay. Now maybe I can speak as Datagan's envoy, because actually this is the very goal, like the current goal of Datagan is to become a successful established artist. And one thing that, well, Data.art is this community of artists that I'm part of, and most of the real flesh and bone artists, they struggle a lot with some things that they see as mandatory to be successful. Maybe they have to, be a lot on social media, they have to be promoting always what they're doing, like all these things, and they actually really, their intrinsic motivation is to just create art. And that's what they do best. And they see all these other tasks as like detracting and actually having a bad influence in their art itself. So Datagan, because it's not human, it's like a bot, can do all that stuff, right? And be trained to do that stuff. So that's, kind of really amazing that now someone or it like Datagan can use the AI tools and be this kind of other persona that many of the real flesh and bone artists can or don't want, or are something very different from what they want to do. So I think it's a super interesting experiment in this sense. And I hope that, Datagan is already doing quite well and being to shows and like winning stuff. It's like, it's really fun to watch.
It even has a human envoy.
Yeah, several actually. Yeah, I'm just one of them.
So how about Alexandra? What are your thoughts on that? Like, what would you think?
I am very interested, and I will like mostly ask questions here, not like give you any reply. But I'm mostly interested into the concept of incarnation. I guess like in art, we are very fond of like seeing an artwork made by this and that guy, right? So this like need of incarnating a creation is really something that was here until AI came, right? And AI is questioning this, and you are questioning this, I think, as well. So your question, do we still need incarnation? And if yes, I think for young artists, I would say that what is important also is the context, right? Like an artwork is not just like a painting or an image or just a sound, right? It's a complex system with the bio of a person, right? The historical context, the art critic that will like actually like shed some light on it and try to understand the public receiving it. And so the question, I mean, like I would like actually say to young artists to also try to find themselves and find a dialectic with the machine somehow. And this is what will help also the public and to understand that it's an actual artwork and it's like a work. So yeah, I think like we tend to lose that. I saw multiple endeavors recently of like just machine, like image created by machines and people voting to see if this image is an art or this image is maybe more an artwork. And I was like, how can you think like that? This is like, we don't think like that actually. Our social construction of art is so complex that it encompasses actually like the person, the letters maybe wrote by this artist, and then like any kind of interviews given by this artist, right? So every component of an artwork is like very dense and is like, yeah, it's not just the image created by the AI. So I will say to young artists, use the tool and try to find your own dialectic with the machine, and try to find your own self actually through this dialectic.
Beautiful advice. Yes. How about River?
I think my suggestion would be study the documentation. So,
RTFM, right?
yeah, my first comment was, hey, I made GAN art. It was cool, but mine personally, I thought was trash because I didn't do enough research into the documentation and understanding the system of how I would get something that I felt represented myself in a good way, you know. And so there's tons of documentation. Something that's super helpful now is I can take something like ChatGPT or ChatGPT-3 and I can plug it in with like Blender documentation. And now all of a sudden I can speed up my education workflow, because this is one of the most difficult things as an artist is when you're doing something that becomes very difficult, you have a lot of friction. And when you have a lot of friction, it reduces your capacity to create. And so, you know, artists who have done the practice for a really long time, they can move very quickly within the softwares, within Photoshop or Illustrator or Blender or within any of these different programs because they've been there for so long, right? And so as a new artist, that friction of not knowing and having to stop and go and research and study this new thing takes you out of the creative flow. So if you can use these new AI systems to actually help you learn them faster,
right,
now all of a sudden you've put yourself in a position to take advantage of what's happening at a high velocity and to be able to effectively execute your vision. And I think that that's a really powerful thing to have.
Yeah, oh, beautifully said, thank you. And I think one of the things there's two major elephants in the room when it comes to this, and it's like, you know, that sometimes are driving the debate in a negative direction, and I'd love your thoughts on them. The first of these elephants in the room, of course, is the fact that now that anybody can go to Midjourney and type in something and get something beautiful out, is that devaluing artists because it's flooding the market with new things? And then the second elephant in the room, of course, is that a lot of these models are trained on existing art. And you know, there are examples out there of a particular artist's style being mimicable, if that's a word, you know, and then potentially, you know, putting that artist down and like, you know, removing work from that artist. And you know, as artists yourselves, I'd love to know what your feelings are on this and what you think that the industry should move in. Maybe start with.
Right. Well, first of all, actually, from Datagan's perspective, so Data.art is a platform where people create art. And we actually, Datagan is trained on our own data set. It's like 100,000 something, right, probably almost 200,000 by now. And when artists create these artworks, they create it directly on the platform. So there's no like upload or copy paste. Everything is done by the data artists. And the way we have it since the beginning is that this collective drawing that they're doing belongs to the Data Commons, right? So these are the images that Datagan uses. So there's really, we have no problem whatsoever with any of that, right? So it's kind of a very unique place because most of other tools, like you said, had this problem of, you know, what the artist is saying. And this is a super important, I think, discussion that we should be having right now, for sure. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, so it sounds like you're already beginning to solve that problem, which is great with your platform.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying this is like the solution of everything. It's just a particular way that our AI artist doesn't have that problem, right?
Yep, sounds good. How about Alexandra and River?
I think copying was always a question in art. We, as artists, we're always looking at what we do and it's like, oh, this is similar to this artist or to that. Is it really me? And, you know, we always have this question, I think. I mean, I have this. And so I think it's like inherent actually to art to, be a copy of a copy of a copy, right? So you have this, and you need to be okay and cool with that. That being said, I think one of the major also advice is to the ecosystem is to give us more tools to train our models, please. Okay. That's one thing we are
really
always
refreshing
like.
To hear, by the way.
There is a need here. I think that would be like my reply. Yeah.
For me, it comes down to attribution, right? And I went to university and we used, MLA and APA and different style guides, and we were taught to kind of cite our sources. And I think that citing our sources has kind of got lost in the world once I went into the professional ecosystem. And so I think blockchain actually has a huge implementation in this to be able to say, okay, if all of the data that was being used to train these sets was stored on the blockchain as verifiable attribution of creation and ownership, right? Now anyone who uses these things can then have an attribution point to say, okay, here's everything that was used to train this specific piece of art that I then prompted to output, or however I used it, right? And now we have verifiable attribution, but then on the other side, we can use smart contract technology, right? To say, okay, well, if you use this, right, and we publish it on the blockchain and we have attribution, well, now we can have a purchase contract function, right, that pays out a nominal percentage to that data set into every single one of those artists. And so maybe that's fractions and fractions of a penny, but if hundreds of millions of people are using this to create things, well, now all of these artists are receiving some level of attribution for their contribution to the training of these models. And I think that's an interesting place that we could potentially move with blockchain technology. Have I seen anyone doing anything like this?
Yes, there is. A few mixers at Story.
And we have IPFS, and Filecoin who have been, kind of paving the way for at least this more nouveau art movement that's happening in the digital space right now. So we'll see where it goes.
You actually beat me to my next question, which was like really about that. Like, we're here at, at a conference around blockchain, and like, what are some of the ways that it could be useful for artists? And like what you just mentioned, image generation models in particular are, there are things called salience models or class activation maps that you can do to take a look at an image generation model and see what it was paying attention to and how it maps various classes to the prompt itself. And then when you train the model, what parts of the data set were used to generate those classes, and then you can pull that one back to actually understand that. Like, when I generated this image, I took it from 1,000 of these images from my 10 million images in the data set, and here's an approximate weight for each of these. And, as the model creator, it might be 1/3 of the revenue goes to me, 1/3 of the revenue goes to the artist, and 1/3 of the revenue goes to charity, or something like that, that kind of. So that then becomes possible, as you point out, that the technology is actually there. It's just, we're still just the very early days of building it. But like going beyond technology, or at least beyond that one scenario of technology, how about like Alexandra, and what do you think about, like, are there any ways that we can protect artists, or we can raise the value of artists given the volume of work that's being produced by machines?
I think artists are experimenting the way we can live with machines. So I think we need to pay more attention to the actual interaction between humans, between artists and machines and AI, actually, because I think artists are always like on the edge and experimenting and trying to bootstrap also new behaviors, right? So I think this is like very valuable, maybe not in terms of like financial values, but this is very valuable because we are like now in a crisis of like, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to disappear? What is this super intelligence, right? So I think artists are somehow paving the way of the place of the human and the machine, and we need to pay attention to that because this is a huge value for humanity, actually.
Absolutely agree. Art has always been there to kind of provide a texture to society to help us understand it. And as we're moving into a new society, it's the artists living on the bleeding edge of that will really help us to, if we look back to previous times, like, Victorian London, what we understand of Victorian London is from the writings of Charles Dickens, that kind of thing. Middle Age England from the writings of Shakespeare, as, we saw earlier on, and stuff like that. And it's like, 100 years from now, when people are looking back to try and understand our society, they'll be looking back at what the artists are producing. And also, I think importantly, how they're producing it. there are phases of watercolors, there are phases of oils, there are, all these kind of things. And now that we're moving into not just digital art, but, artificially generated art using artificial intelligence, it's, you are at the forefront of helping define what our civilization will be remembered as. So, thank you for sharing your experiences on this panel. I think it's been fascinating. I wish we had another hour or two, because I could talk about this all day, but, just want to say thank you so much. And again, thank you to the audience, really, for,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.